Hello and welcome to our next module. In this module, we'll be discussing powers of the national government, state government, and some really limitations on both. So with that, let's get started. First of all, what we want to define here, just in general, two types of powers that the federal government has. One is delegated powers. You might hear this as enumerated powers. These are the powers specifically granted to the federal government. And when we talk about this, in most cases, we are really referring to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. You have to remember, Article 1 in the Constitution really outlines Congress, the legislative branch. And Section 8 really goes through the whole laundry list of what federal government, especially Congress, can do. All right. And so when we come to that, we think of really tax and spend as a primary power and regulate interstate commerce. And that's one thing in the context of this course, let alone this module. It's really hard to really fully give you the gravity of how important the power to regulate interstate commerce really is. Next, implied powers. Powers are given to Congress in the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8. Now, when it comes to this power, a lot of times, especially for you business majors who've taken HR management, I kind of appeal to you in class when it comes to this. Really, maybe anybody when it comes down to you've got some experience or knowledge of this. Think about your job description at work. Why do we kind of stick at the tail end of that? And I'm not going to go to the place where we call it a catch-all. It's not supposed to be. Legally, it can't be. But what the last sentence of pretty much most job descriptions state is pretty much in anything else that is necessary to perform the aforementioned duties, something along those lines. And so that's what we find here at the tail end of Section 8 of Article 1. You have the laundry list of things that Congress can do, but then at the tail end, you have the phrase necessary and proper. All right. So, and that is, it's not really a catch-all, but it does allow for Congress to do anything, or the federal government to carry out any delegated powers through any constitutional means. Now, we do point back to McCulloch versus Maryland. This is a Supreme Court case, earlier 1800s. And what happened in this case was the federal government created a national bank, right? And nowhere in the Constitution does it authorize the federal government to create a national bank. Well, it did so, and there was a lot of pushback and a lot of criticism of this. And in Maryland in particular, they kind of wanted to pick a legal fight, get the courts involved to see, to challenge the constitutionality of this national bank. So in McCulloch versus Maryland, they attempted to tax that national bank that was in their borders. Well, there are two things that came out of this. A lot of times when you look at a Supreme Court case, you think of one, typically one legal issue. McCulloch versus Maryland had two. One was, can the subordinate, the state, tax the superior, the national government? No, you can't. Secondly, what was at issue was the necessary and proper clause. That really hadn't been challenged up to this point. And the Supreme Court basically came out and said, listen, nowhere in the Constitution does it give Congress the authority to create a national bank. However, two things. One is it does authorize Congress to regulate commerce. And secondly, through the necessary and proper clause, it seems reasonable to regulate commerce. You would create a bank. So again, as you have those different sections of delegated powers, it doesn't necessarily tell you how to do it, and that's where the necessary and proper clause can come into play. Limits to the powers of the national government, some things to go over, a couple things we've touched on already. The Bill of Rights, through amendments, it protects individual rights to in large part. Bills of attainder. Now, this is one of those can't do it's. All right. These are acts singling out specific people without trial. All right. Cannot do that. Ex post facto laws. This is another can't do it. This makes an act illegal after it was committed legally. Now, we don't necessarily think of committing something legally, but we do every day. Now, I always like to think of this example. Let's say you're driving home on the interstate today, speed limit 60, you go 60 right on the dot. Tomorrow, you get a knock on the door, state trooper gives you a ticket. Speed limit now is 55. And so even though you're obeying the speed limit legally yesterday, well, it's not the speed limit today, and they kind of go back in time and give you a ticket. Cannot do that. Cannot do that. All right. Writ of habeas corpus. It requires bringing the accused before a court to state reasons for detention. You cannot imprison arbitrarily. All right. There has to be, at some point, you bring someone in front of the court to state reasons for detention. And lastly here, due process. All right. So these are just some things that limit powers of the national government, especially in relation to individual rights. All right. Moving on, powers of the states. Yeah, primarily when we think about the states, we think about reserve powers, the 10th Amendment. We touched on that briefly in a previous module. All powers not delegated to the federal government or denied to the states are reserved to the states. All right. And with this is the concept of dual sovereignty. We've touched on this here and there. This was the original concept with the founders, that as we moved away from the Articles of Confederation, where each state had full sovereignty, the federal government at that time, as it was created, it was not assumed to take away all sovereignty from the states. It was only supposed to take away certain items so society could better function. All right. When it comes to limitations on state powers, the same as federal limitations, plus supremacy of the national government, and also the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. With that, that's the end of this module. As always, go back, review it, pause, start as needed. And with that, we will see you in the next module.